Welcome everyone to the next webinar in the LSX Biopharma webinar series. Today for the next hour, going to be talking on the topic of from molecules to markets, how AI is accelerating discovery, strategy and growth. Very delighted to be joined here by Alexandria Hall from AlphaSense, who's going to be moderating this webinar. Alexandria, maybe I can hand over to yourself at this moment to get going with a couple of introductions and the start of the webinar. Everybody joining us in the audience today, please do make use of the Q&A function and the comment box at the bottom. We will do our best to get around and do some questions a little bit later on. But for now, Alexandria, over to yourself.
Fantastic. Thank you for opening the webinar, Adam, and thank you everyone for joining us this afternoon. Very much looking forward to moderating the session. I think we have a really fantastic array of experience on the line here with Duncan, Robbie, and Sai. So looking forward to pulling on some of their kind of lived experiences through the various organizations of which they've been part. And just to introduce myself, so a lot of my role is really in supporting pharma and biopharma organizations in the use of AI to improve some of their processes. And I'm probably exposed to more conversations than many on a daily basis in terms of how organizations are really thinking about what AI can do from them in the terms of innovation, but also how they approach what kind of tools could also be used to optimize the work that they do within their teams. So that's predominantly kind of my experience and how I support organizations today. But I'll hand over probably to Duncan, and then we'll do a quick round of introductions so everyone feels really comfortable on who's on the line today, and then we'll dive into topic number one.
Thanks, Alex. So good afternoon, everyone. I'm Duncan Young in the oncology business development team at AstraZeneca. I've been with the organization in a few different BD roles since joining in 2015 with a brief stint in biotech in between. I'm really here to talk about AI from the business development lens at AstraZeneca, how we're looking at that, how we're looking at partnerships to support our AI strategy. This year, more than ever, AI foundation models are core part of what we're doing. We've had 2 deals earlier this year to support our AI strategy within oncology, and hopefully come out through the discussion, talk about the impact that that's having, what we're looking for, and how we're looking to collaborate.
Fantastic. Thank you, Duncan. I think I'll hand to Robbie now.
Hi, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon. My name is Robbie Kanichai. I'm heading the business development team for technologies and externalization at Merck Healthcare. As such, in my role, I'm involved in quite a number of partnership discussions around how to use, with partners, how to use AI to enhance our R&D activities. And previous to that, I've been with Merck for the last 10 years in various BD roles. Before that, was working in venture capital and in M&A advisory.
Fantastic. Thanks, Robbie. Over to Sai.
Thanks, Alexandria. Hello, everyone. Great to be here and look forward to the conversation. I'm Sai Jasti, responsible for data science and AI for Bayer Pharmaceuticals in the context of R&D. So my team is responsible for driving the AI capabilities all the way from early research discovery to the clinical side of things. And prior to Bayer, I spent time at GSK and AstraZeneca. And really look forward to the conversation to share some insights and hopefully also learn something from the BD colleagues for a change from a different lens here as well.
Great, fantastic. So we have a number of different topics to get through today with limited time. So if there are things that people would like to dig into in the chat, specific questions, please do, to Adam's point, make full use of that. And I think, today's topic, particularly pertinent given the announcement from Google launching their AI mode for those of us in the UK. AI is obviously at the peak of its hype curve at the moment, but I think one of the key questions that comes up most often is, okay, what forms of AI should we be looking at and what does this actually mean for our parts of the organization? So hopefully the conversation today will provide some ideas, some thought generation that you can all leave the webinar with and take back to your organization. So to kick things off, let's look at tackling topic number one, which is, Sai, probably a topic that you can speak to very well, given your experience in looking across the whole pharma value team and how AI has transformed a lot of operations within the organizations that you've been part of. So if we think about some leading life science companies and how integrating AI into the R&D organization, maybe starting with early stage research, what are some of the practical applications that you have seen, Sai, in the use of AI in early stage research?
Yeah, I mean, maybe I'll give you a little bit of a context of how we think about applying AI to the value chain, right? Like, I think a lot of the audience are familiar with the challenges of the drug development, like why we need to use AI to what we do, because it takes at least 10, 15 years to bring a drug to the market, and the cost is around 2.5, depending on which research publication you read, and it's only going up. So that's the why behind the what we are doing. So the singular focus we have at Bayer is to solve for this R&D productivity challenge. And when we talk about productivity, it's not just the efficiency side of things, but it's also about the effectiveness side of things. So the way we are approaching the application of AI is how do you create these abundance of opportunities that you want to go after? So that way, you know, what are the target disease links? What are those biomarkers? What are those nuggets we can pull through the use of AI and machine learning to understand the targets that we want to pursue and ultimately address the unmet need that's out there. So that's where the efficiency and the effectiveness angle comes into play early on. So we try to go after the quality assets upfront, and we use a lot of machine learning, and most cases it's all deep learning elements. And then once we have it, it also translates to the molecular design. As we all know, AlphaFold is one of the foundation models that has kind of transformed how you do the structure predictions, but that's only a starting point. But then how do you use that to translate that into property predictions? And how do you not only speed it up, but increase your confidence in what you're doing? I mean, I can go on around the applications of these things, right? So that's maybe on the effectiveness side of things. And then you also have the second dimension of efficiency. I mean, things like clinical data submission or medical writing, and that's a sweet spot for generative AI. So wherever we can drive the efficiency side of things, even in the lab context, like how do you create the regulatory documents that you need early on, even for animal testing and stuff, to the clinical side of things. So there are a number of things from an efficiency perspective that's already happening as we speak. Hopefully that gives you a little bit of a context. It's the dimension of efficiency and effectiveness that we focus with a singular focus on R&D productivity.
Fantastic. Thank you for that insight, Sai. And just to summarize that, so from your perspective, you see AI kind of accelerating discovery by analyzing, let's say, omni data sources to identify potential drug targets, biomarkers. And then the other aspect of that is streamlining, let's say, potential literature reviews, enabling, the researchers to kind of synthesize vast amounts of information, vast scientific publications and clinical data to really drill that down and reduce the target identification timelines by, in some cases, years. And then that results in improving preclinical efficiency. So yeah, fantastic insight on those two elements there. And I think that leads us nicely into a second piece in the R&D organization, which is really AI transforming drug discovery through virtual screening. And perhaps some of the predictive modeling that is also used as well. And I know, Duncan and Robbie, from your perspective, you're probably viewing this through the lens of what partnerships can we look at in the drug discovery space, and moving more from an asset-focused partnering strategy to more of a what are the types of technology that we potentially need to bring in-house to ensure that our organizations have those capabilities. So looking more at the drug discovery partnerships that you can obtain. So perhaps we'll start with perhaps Duncan. I know that you specialize obviously in oncology as a therapy area, and we had this earlier conversation about switching from asset to technology focused. How have you seen the shift from asset to looking more at what are the organizations with drug discovery capabilities, as potential target opportunities?
Yeah, thanks, Alex. So we've definitely seen this shift in the last few years, and what we're looking at, and also what we're looking for companies that are utilizing AI approaches in their discovery efforts. So most biotech companies now will have some form of AI to support what they're doing, either on the target side or on the optimization of the biologic or the chemistry. And there's an element of, I guess, commoditization of some of the tools that we see in the use of that within the biotechs to some extent. I think where we're seeing a move now and our focus is looking at really where's AI going to have the biggest impact on value to size points, where it's going to have the biggest impact on efficiencies, cost efficiencies, productivity, and that's really in the clinical use. In oncology, we know that it's all about developing combinations and developing the right combination regimen for the right patients in the right settings. And this adds multiple layers of analysis, variables that you need better insights into form. And the key value proposition, I think, where we see AI, and I'll come on to talk about a couple of the deals that we've done in this space in a second, is how can you accelerate your ability to identify the right combination to bring into the clinic, optimize for the dose setting of that combination, and match that to the right patient. So that acceleration, improving the attrition that you see in clinical development, accelerating your ability to get to the right combination dose for those two agents in a clinical setting, where there's a really incredible potential for AI foundation model approaches to help inform what we do. We've done 2 partnerships this year, coming from the oncology organization, one with Tempus and Pathos, where we got an ambition to build the largest oncology foundation model in collaboration with them. So leveraging our data and some of the data that they have and the expertise across both partners to bring this together. And also with Medela AI to bring in another foundation model to support that value chain as well. So I think that the shift has been looking at companies from an asset or platform perspective where they're using AI to inform what they're doing, to really thinking, how can we apply AI to a key area, key value inflection point within the drug discovery and development process.
Yeah, fantastic. And when we think about maybe your organizations working together, so Sai, from your perspective, you work across the value chain, but have a lot of experience within R&D. And I know when we kind of opened this webinar, it would be fantastic to share some learnings between the group, because you work in obviously different stages of the life cycle. How do you translate, Sai, what you do then to a business development team? So if we're thinking about share of that information internally and how you might use AI to validate some of that information that you're sharing with more of the commercially minded teams. If you could talk about kind of the practical application of sharing your findings to BD, M&A, that would be fantastic. So I see that as another area of opportunity within organizations in terms of process improvement, is on the share of information between R&D focused teams to business development, to say, hey, we have these potential targets in mind. We need you to kind of go and source these now.
Yeah, I mean, I think you and Duncan touched on it a little bit, right? Like when you think about one of the sweet spots for generative AI is around improving those process, right? Like traditionally, if our BD teams, as an example, have to stroll through a ton of information, right? How fast you're able to get to whether it's a target value profile or target product profile or whatever the case might be, right? Like that's one way. I mean, to some extent, it is getting commoditized a bit. Now, you also have to, maybe we are getting into a little bit of the challenges with the implementation, but this is where a level of scientific hypothesis and scientific rigor also needs to be applied, because 80% of the published data we all know cannot be replicated experimentally. So this is where the input from a scientist become that much more important, so that it gives our BD teams even more confidence in terms of what we are sharing. And then automatically that translates to our commercial leaders as well, right? Because as you think about going after any asset acquisitions or even increasing the indication space of a given asset we need to have this information handy to be able to make those decisions. And that's why it's also about speeding up our decision making is the other way to look at it. Again, don't want to use the buzzwords. This is where, like, okay, can we equip our executive team with a set of assistants, or a BD teams with a set of assistants? So that's how we look at giving these tools so that the decision makers are able to trust and have the confidence in what they are doing.
Yeah, fantastic. And I think whilst we're kind of on target identification, evaluation, maybe you start with a longer list of indications, and you need to shortlist that to, let's say, one to three, and then that might go to obviously the kind of scouting evaluation team. Robbie, I know that's very much kind of in the wheelhouse of what you do. So I'd love to hear maybe from some of your experience on where you've seen some successes via various uses of AI on target identification and evaluation.
Yeah, I mean, if we really talk about target ID on a molecular level, I mean, that's really a very sort of bioinformatics heavy approach that, sort of requires dedicated partnerships, as Duncan also has alluded to, foundation models and, large omics data sets that need to be evaluated in certain settings. So then identify a list of targets that may be appropriate, and then, sort of a scientific validation thereafter. But what we are using AI for also, I mean, in terms of search and evaluation, is really, I mean, if we're thinking about a particular technology, for example, that we like to investigate further or do a partnership around, or even certain assets or technology areas to develop long lists, for example, whereas before, and to some extent still is a quite laborious approach to go through sort of newsletters and patent applications and literature and so on and so forth. Generative AI and dedicated services around that can be really useful to come up with a starter for 10 around a long list of potential partners or technologies that might be of interest in that area. And that has been, I mean, we are using that sort of frequently now, or as part of our normal workflow, really as a starter. And then it also helps then to shape additional thinking about where to sort of focus the next step of the search, and which direction this should go into, then also in discussions with stakeholders. Yeah, I mean, just one aspect I maybe wanted to add to what Sai and Duncan had said. Yes, I mean, Merck is also using AI, or trying to use AI across this whole spectrum of the value chain. I think something unique with Merck is that through our life science units, we also offer AI services around, in particular, chemistry to our customers, our life science customers, and our electronic customers, to basically as a service to generate, to explore novel chemistry through AI tools, and that is fed with data, internal data that we have, to help them, meet their design molecules that ultimately meet their property needs.
Fantastic.
The other thing, sorry, so just going to sort of pick up on the other way that we've been looking at using it in the BD context is often it's very difficult to understand how two different companies' platforms perform. There's a black box element, and in isolation, it can be very difficult from a presentation to tease out what's really behind this, or what insights could this offer beyond what we can do or what other partners have. So we have been making available particular data sets through our Open Innovation Initiative to share with academic groups, but also with companies. So this is something that we've looked at. We've tried to generate insights from. Maybe we share it with you, and we've got an immediate benchmark compared to work that we've done to understand how some of these other approaches are performing. So those sorts of ways you might look at benchmarking small molecules or antibodies if you're looking at a traditional asset type deal, but ways that you can share some tools and insights and even point to the publications that we've made on this to understand how others can then benchmark and compare.
Yeah, fantastic. And it sounds like we're getting into the conversation around kind of strategic planning, AI enhancing decision making. So, I mean, certainly I hear from, a lot of the organizations that we work with, it's, how do we get better at prioritizing, the areas where we're going to win? How do we actually identify, the short list of firms that we're then going to conduct due diligence on? But a lot of that is also kind of the ongoing market monitoring. And then once you have your shortlist, it's the due diligence optimization. So perhaps Robbie, Duncan, I could maybe hand to yourselves to think about how you practically have potentially implemented AI into your commercial assessments. So when you're coming to making a decision on, right, we have identified the list of companies or their assets that we think could be a good fit for our portfolios. How do you remove risk from those decisions that you're making and in those commercial assessments that you're building, and how have you potentially seen AI help in your confidence on making those decisions?
Yeah, maybe I'll make a start, Duncan. So I mean, we actually use quite a lot of different AI tools and just also different AI tools to help us in our both scientific assessment and commercial assessment of any opportunity for that matter. But it's less about generative AI than more about a quicker way to research things and get to the fact-based information that is necessary in terms of okay, what is the clinical performance of certain benchmark compounds for or competitor compounds of a certain asset, whereas before that may have taken half an hour to an hour for people to go through various publications and so on and so forth. Now, with the use of certain databases that then themselves use AI to extract that information from respective literature and clinicaltrials.gov and so on and so forth in a much more efficient manner, we get to that information much quicker. So that's sort of certainly an efficiency gain. Same on the commercialization front. I mean, there's, sort of, whereas it would have taken, days or weeks to go through various analyst reports to get information around peak sales and so on and so forth, nowadays through these tools that can be done much quicker. But that's always only a starting point, right? I mean, so the experts need to go through that data, sort of sense check that data. We need to come up with our own assumptions and validations for that data, and that's really where the work starts. So it compresses the sort of beginning of the work quite dramatically, I'd say. But sort of this piece around getting organizational alignment, understanding, and rationale for the opportunity itself is not just based on a peak sales number. It's a larger narrative, and that narrative still needs to be built, and that's where the majority of the work and sort of brain power goes to. And yeah.
And similarly, I think really resonate with what Robbie's saying about when it comes to sort of scouting and compiling that data. I mean, this isn't a dig at LSX, but other conferences, the design of the websites, how posters are put up, are really not productive for a search and evaluation professional trying to find what they need to find. And you can use tools to collate this into a format that is far more digestible and something you can use to engage senior leaders in the business and help prioritize exactly what you're asking for. Rather than just a simple keyword search, you can have a lot of nuance behind exactly what you want to tease out by pulling that data together yourself with the right sort of AI tools. So I think that's definitely transforming how we approach congresses, conferences, and some of the partnering discussions that we have to pull out the opportunities and understand immediately how they're ranking against our strategic needs or against benchmarks that we're particularly looking to compare to.
Yeah.
The other thing, I suppose, if you needed a plug, Alex, is AlphaSense's Gen AI, Gen Search tools, very useful to then ask a bit more nuanced questions and get some of that analysis back in the digestible format too.
Well, I'm very pleased to hear that, Duncan. Thank you for the plug. And as we think about, it sounds like creating repeatable processes is something that AI is being used for in all of your organizations. And I'm also thinking about this in terms of the use of AI for kind of future-looking trends and how AI can help you kind of stay competitive. Obviously, one of those is, yes, certainly, monitoring kind of early stage, getting a grasp of readouts that are at congresses when you can't be in 20 places at once, and using very specific smart AI tools to read through things that are traditionally very hard to obtain, whether it's OCR kind of image search and Gen AI overcoming that to enable you to read through millions of documents, millions of data sets to make sense of that and refine your strategy. It sounds like that's something you're all doing. But as we're thinking about kind of market monitoring and predicting what's the next big opportunity for us or area that we should potentially consider, I think, Sai, this is probably something that you could speak to as well. How are you thinking about using AI to not necessarily predict the future, but at least have a better sense of monitoring what could come next?
Sorry, Alexandria, maybe I didn't follow the question completely. So can you please
I'll rephrase
speak the last one?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm thinking about the use of AI in a practical sense, and maybe some experiences that you've had either through an R&D lens or a business development lens on how are you monitoring what are the key upcoming trends. That could be what are the key trends in the use of AI in R&D organizations? What's the next big thing that we need to consider as an organization? Or from a BD lens, how are you using AI to monitor what the next big trends could be that you should consider as a team?
Yeah, I mean, the fundamentals still remain the same, right? Because if you think about like monitoring the trends and these type of things, ultimately it's about mining the literature, mining what's happening in the World Wide Web, if you will. So I think the way I look at it is it's more about providing that information at the fingertips, because I don't think any one of us actually can predict maybe or like the way the science is going. We want to head in a certain direction, but at least from my vantage point, it's not something that we could actually predict from an AI perspective, like where is R&D going. But what we can do is provide that information at the fingertip. Maybe I'm really curious to understand from Robin and also Duncan on it, but at least that's the position we have at this point.
Yeah, I mean, for me or for us, I think the next sort of thing technologically that's going to be very interesting is sort of agentic AI, where so the AI in itself is able to use different data sources with various types of information in there and collate the information in a way that is then digestible and presentable to senior management. At the moment, we have these tools. I mean, we have sort of normal generative AI, so I call that, right? But we find it very challenging to do, for example, a target product profile or an initial assessment, which is actually should only be based on data that is relevant, or maybe in a data room or something like that, but on facts basically, right? And to bring that in a format, and we have templates and so on and so forth, right? But to have the AI so basically fill out the template simply because it's sort of there may be conflicting information or perceivably conflicting information within the data set that the AI is using to fill the template and so on and so forth. So it turns out there's actually a lot of judgment calls that a human makes on the data that is presented to that human to fill out that assessment, so to speak, right? And I think we certainly have have not been able, so to speak, to use with sort of commonly available AI tools to be able to do that in a way that is really high quality. I mean, obviously you can fill out these things if 60% of the things that are in there is correct, right? It's actually from an expert point of view, point of useless, right? There is a high expectation that the first go is sort of 99% there. Otherwise, people won't be using it, so to speak. There's the hope that, by the use of agents and sort of AI being able to self-check itself or the work output, that these sort of assessments that certainly still require a human to compile in the first place, not just to check, but to compile in the first place, that will, hopefully at some point in the future will be done also in a more automated way.
I think the only thing I'd add is maybe just bring out the point there that really how we're using it and how we see it being used is about enabling and empowering the teams. So there's going to be that element of expert insight, but empowered and enabled by the way that agentic AI has pulled that information together. Because I think that the TPPs are an interesting example. That these are always going to have an element of compromise across the various factors that you'll be looking at for a particular molecule, and that's where some judgment call is going to come in. But how the AI can help pull that together to enable that sort of human interface judgment call is where we see the value there.
Yeah, awesome. So it sounds like, just to summarize some of the discussion points so far, that AI is predominantly, used in all of your organizations for the efficiency piece, but there will always be obviously the human intelligence application on top of that to fact check. And I'm now thinking to, some of the barriers of adoption of AI and, alluding to my earlier question on things like predictive analytics and market monitoring and how you can use analytics tools to get a grasp of, big upcoming trends, but then you will still need to fact check that with, other types of research, kind of the human intelligence on top. But I know a big conversation is all pharma organizations are, investing in AI right now, making huge investments, and these are often top-down driven initiatives that then filter to the individual business units and teams. When your organizations are encouraged to look at the use of, AI and adoption within your organizations, I think probably something that everyone on the line is interested in hearing about is, where do you start? Like, where do you think about prioritizing within your organizations on when and where AI could have an application? So I'll kind of open that to the room. I think a lot of people have probably received the mandate that, okay, leadership have encouraged us all to use AI, and it's like, okay, great. Do we get someone dedicated on the team to go away and run a project and see, what are the areas where we can really adopt and where is it going to add value? But I'd love to hear from all three of you on when something like that happens, where do you start?
Yeah, I mean, I can go first. So at least the way we approach it, right? Like one is this whole phase of ideation. So what you don't want to do is stop the ideas to be coming in, no matter what it is, right? Simple all the way to the complex, because at least that way that there is an energy behind the organization. And in a minute, I'll tell you why that is going to be important as well. Because having those ideas and then having a process to quickly assess the feasibility and also the impact these ideas could have is an important element. So that's the first step. And then the second part to this is around the data, right? Like especially in the context of R&D, as an example, I mean, things like your efficiency side of things, like literature search and these types of things, are a bit of a no-brainer. With certain guardrails, you're able to implement it. But what we have to be absolutely clear about is when you're using some of these things in a property prediction or prediction of toxicity, you really need to assess like what is the state of your data and ensure that you're really able to solve that problem, or at least you're able to look at it from the lens of Is it possible or not possible? Otherwise, you're going to fall into the trap of tech for the sake of tech and not tech for the sake of solving a real business problem at hand. So that's why the data becomes that much more important. And then the final piece is around the mindset, right? Like we also have to be ready to be able to adopt these capabilities, because you can have the best predictive AI tool or the algorithm, but if you're not using it in your workflows, whether it's our scientists or the clinicians, it's not going to generate the impact. So that's why the first piece around having the ability to come up with these ideas, it kind of gives a sense of co-creation for the people who are involved. And you actually can use that energy to catalyze the organization in terms of the adoption if you really see a value in pursuing certain things. At least that's what we have seen these things being successful in terms of like how we are able to permeate all of these AI tools into the organization.
Fantastic.
And we've had multiple, like there's been a push to demonstrate across the organization how we're leveraging AI, but within BD specifically, so within search and evaluation, transactions, and alliance management, as well as our strategy and CI teams, we've had sort of joint ideation sessions to look at shared pain points, how we might be developing things, and then help sort of hone ideas that we can propose to a central team to help develop these tools. So exactly as Sai says, there's that bit of ownership and engagement from the teams on that ideation to then be involved in the development of something as it's rolled out.
Yeah, I mean, maybe adding to the, calling out specific barriers itself, right? So, I mean, I think there is sort of two groups of people, I think, in any organization, right? One is sort of the early adopters who are really keen to use these new tools and, want to find application areas and very excited and, sort of for them, it's easy to bring the energy, the initial sort of hurdle energy, so to speak, to bring and use these tools. And they're also willing to accept some deficiencies, right? But then once you have an application or a use case and you have something, right? I think to convince the next group of users is actually, I find quite difficult, because there is an expectation, because it's the digital tool and the world we live in, there's an expectation that it just works, right? I'll just press the button and the result that I get out is 100%. And if it's not 100%, then sort of the perception is, well, it doesn't work, right? So there is a little bit a sort of a bias against these digital tools and AI tools producing work output versus experimental data, where particularly scientists all understand there is variability, not all experiments work, and so on and so forth, right? So there is a higher forgiveness, so to speak, towards experimental data and experimental outcomes versus a prediction that is made based on, AI predictive algorithm. And that sort of, I don't know exactly what the psychological sort of reason for that is, but I think that's an observation that we make every day when we sort of also propose the use of AI tools in certain workflows and so on and so forth. I think that's one major, or that's one sort of hurdle in the use of AI, so broader use of AI in the organization. I think the other hurdle is really around value for money, so to speak, right? Because we are at this stage still in an environment where, yes, AI makes us more efficient, but it doesn't really result in any real cost reductions. So anything you do with AI in a drug development program within the, be it discovery or development, is additional cost that comes towards the program or the company, whatever, right? And I think that's also part of the reasons why you see the use of AI or these AI tools, be it anywhere, relatively rarely with biotechs. I mean, there are, of course, biotechs who build their entire business model around AI and, generating new molecules. But if you're talking to a biotech who doesn't have that, right, they actually don't invest. I mean, it looks like at least they don't invest a lot into sort of, okay, let's do a collaboration with somebody who has, who can do a virtual screen on in this space for us. And that's, I think, because it makes the overall development more expensive for them, and they are really cash constrained and need to be looking out for where they spend their money.
Yeah,
I
absolutely.
mean, yeah. So I think sort of, and we've seen particularly in as Sai mentioned in the ideation processes and so on and so forth, really finding use cases that are valuable enough to support the investment that is needed, on the tool development, but also the buying in the data is actually quite challenging. We're still doing it in many cases just because we want to be at the forefront of doing this, and we understand we need to invest and we need to learn and we just need to try out. But I think sort of making these things sort of part of the standard use of how we do drug development, oftentimes the costs, not oftentimes, in some instances, the costs are prohibitive, actually.
Yeah, I think really interesting observations there, Robbie. And I think that leads to another interesting kind of reflection. So when you mentioned the point around biotechs perhaps not adopting AI as broadly as, let's say, mid-sized, larger size pharma organizations, that makes me think about, when there is kind of an enterprise-wide mandate for adoption of AI in an organization, how do you balance the use of kind of enterprise-wide AI and that being encouraged in an organization with things that are really specific for your function? And how do you think about the difference between the two, and how do you align like your specific initiatives to a broader initiative? I think that's probably quite an interesting thing to talk about.
Yeah, and maybe I can take a stab at it, right? Like the way at least we look at it is, because it's one of those things, right? Are you going to move a mountain, or you really want to move a smaller pieces of this mountain? Because if you try to move the mountain, it's, as you know, it will reduce the speed, and maybe the innovation doesn't happen faster, and all of a sudden you feel like you are stuck, not making the progress. At least the balance we have is identify like the right level where you can see a certain level of homogeneity of these applications of AI. And like, yeah, the commercial use cases are different than R&D use cases are different than the manufacturing and supply chain. At least like that's how we have landed. But then the key here is to make sure the information is available in a transparent way to the broader teams, so that they don't repeat the same things, so they don't repeat the same type of infrastructure investments that are needed. The algorithms, the use cases are different, but then maybe the data part is going to be something that we have to do it at a functional level. At least that's the balance that we are, at least what we have found to be successful is to stay at that level versus like trying to take it up a notch where you slow everyone down and no one really gets the impact, or no one actually sees the value of what we're doing.
So it sounds like from your perspective, Sai, that almost democratizing the access to data throughout the organization, like that's absolutely an application of AI enterprise-wide, and that benefits everyone because it does reduce, duplications. It gets rid of silo potentially between more commercially focused teams and R&D, which I think most organizations feel is or experience has been a challenge historically. And that's where, enterprise-wide use is applicable, helpful, but then there will always need to be the functions themselves that take some ownership of, what they really need. And the types of AI that are actually useful for business development versus, supply chain manufacturing. The use cases will be different. Robbie and Duncan, how do you, or you had experiences where actually, you've had a business problem within your team and you've had to come up with the initiative of, right, we're going to run this AI project now. It needs to be function specific. These are the areas we see where we could, use AI to add value to the team. How have you kind of suggested that within your organizations?
So I'm not sure we've had that explicitly, but I guess through the ideation work that we do within the team, there's a list of ideas that are pulled together, and we work on ranking those across the functions. But I think to your broad point, within that you can very clearly see themes, and even if there are separate functions asking for a very similar tool, actually what they're asking fundamentally behind that is for the same ability to achieve the same sort of ends. It's just in a different context or with maybe a different data set behind it. So you can, I think, by centralizing and pooling how these opportunities are reviewed, you start to be able to pick out those kind of themes, and then sort of work out how you support those most efficiently. Where maybe there's a broader infrastructure that you could build and just have different facets of that for the different functions that can support what they do.
And I think one of the final topics that leads us quite nicely from this conversation is kind of the commingling of data sets and what that means using AI across, highly regulated content and also in a regulated environment. So, of course, all of your organizations will have a vast amount of proprietary internal content that you will need to, compare and validate versus kind of external when you're conducting your analysis. What are some of the maybe challenges that you have experienced in, being able to actually commingle the external with the internal?
Well, one is, of course, confidentiality, right? I mean, when we're dealing with external data, there's, of course, non-confidential information, and then there's confidential information, and you're not allowed to sort of use confidential information easily in a generative model and sort of use that as a tool to inform whatever it might be, right? So there's a clear sort of legal guardrails around that. I mean, there is a lot of effort, to Sai's point, being made to within Merck to make the internal data available to all employees and in a sort of standardized way, and also software tools that allow each employee actually to interrogate that data and draw certain insights for whatever reason, for whatever use case they might have. So that's one aspect, and that's a big effort to sort of maintain that and sort of have a common data lake and so on and so forth. We within BD try to do something similar with the non-confidential information that we receive. We have a team of 70 people. Everybody receives non-confidential information through conferences, so posters and all that sort of stuff, right? And what we're trying to do now, or what we're doing now, is sort of getting that together into a centralized place so we can actually have the data to then sort of do searches and sort of analysis of that database by ourselves through generative AI. We have our own instance of OpenAI or of ChatGPT. We have our own instance at Merck where we can use that in a very safe environment, which also sort of can rely on data that is non-confidential within the Merck universe. So I think we have the tools all together. We're getting all the tools together to make much better use of these generative models by getting our data in order, so to speak. But we're not quite there yet to sort of see the big killer use case, so to speak, that is potentially worth a whole lot of money, right? We're still this is still the beginning of the journey.
And generally, for some time as well, we've been going back and looking at patient consent forms, updating those, so that we're able to use the data that we get on the studies that we run within this sort of context. But we have to be very careful about confidentiality, the consent, de-identification, and how that is used within these models. Absolutely.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, we are almost, sorry, Sai.
I think just gonna add very quickly, right? In addition to what Duncan and Robbie said, the context of the data is also is also important, right? I think you asked the question around merging the external and internal. Honestly, there are also challenges just merging the internal data. As an example, a 160-year-old company, right? There is a ton of information or data that we actually can tap into. but the context of like how the data was captured is very different, and a lot of times you don't even know what it was. So if you are trying to combine these data sets, there are a lot of considerations that you have to take into account before you start using it in your decision making.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that rounds us off quite nicely on the future of AI in regulated environments, but through the lens of some of the barriers that we've discussed here. So it sounds like one of those really is, the vast amount of data that you have internally. It could be historic. It's obviously the question around confidentiality, and there's probably a vast amount of work that needs to be done where AI could potentially be applied. But it's probably considering, what are some of the ways in which AI could be used to scrape that data and how it was potentially collected, whilst also balancing the fact that it is, extremely confidential. Not sure, Sai, if that's an area where you see like AI could help to improve some of those processes in going through historic data, looking at how it was collected versus a manual process. But obviously, key consideration is the confidentiality piece.
Yeah, I mean, definitely right. I think this is also one of the promises because in the past you actually had to spend a lot of time and effort into interrogating and have a lot of this data curation that needs to happen. But now, especially, at least I believe, like the generative AI, that's one of the sweet spots for giving us a really strong starting point rather than you spending so much of the time, and then you actually can have a small team do the last like 20 or 30% of the curation. Not saying it's a cracked nut already, but the promise is there, and there are some tangible examples where we are really able to shave off a lot of efficiency gains from that one. So I really look forward to that. I think that's the sweet spot.
Yeah, I think to add to what Sai was saying, particularly in regulated environments, if you think about submissions to regulatory authorities, investigator brochures, and things like that, I think that's actually a sweet spot for AI because it's much more about facts that you summarize in a document. And their AI is actually can be pretty good or is pretty good to do that in a very standardized fashion. And then also it's sort of the expert reviewer is able to review that and sort of relatively quickly get to okay, this needs to change or this may be okay, and so on and so forth, right? So I think whereas for an IB in the past, you may have, it may have taken, a number of weeks to put that together, right? Now you can almost do that at a fingertip, and then somebody, sort of an expert reviewer needs to still review it, of course, right? But I think these sort of around regulatory submissions and of all sorts, I think that's really a sweet spot of AI, as it is already, right? And I think the more challenging stuff, if we get more into this creative, innovative, what's the next thing, next big thing, I think we're not there yet.
Great. Thank you for rounding out the final topic, Robbie. So I feel like we've done quite a good job of getting through each one. We have about 5 minutes left. So did want to see and ensure that we address some of the Q&A that's come through from the audience. I think a couple we may have answered as we've gone along, but there were certainly a couple earlier on in the discussion that we could try and tackle with the last few minutes we have. And then we'll do kind of a summary of key themes. And if anyone wants to kind of connect, follow up with questions after the session, then I know personally and the panelists on the line would be very happy to connect and kind of support with questions post session. Hi, Adam.
Hello, thank you everyone for such a great discussion. And yes, indeed, we do have a couple of questions that have come in during the panel. So maybe just going back to this first one, looks like it's more on the BD sort of transaction side. So maybe just opening up this to everybody, do you approach transactions differently when dealing with asset-based or versus platform-based deals? particularly in light of this shift. I think that's referring to something that was being discussed earlier. And then secondly, when working on platform-based deals, do teams typically prefer to build secure internal environments to capture and retain learnings and improvements?
So maybe I can start. I think this came up in the points I was making earlier. So I think that there is, I think we'd be quite open that there is a bit of a shift. Pharma and Pharma BD very used to looking at the world through an asset-focused lens. So when we come to deal making and when we come to sort of valuation and approaches for valuation, the approach, the standards, the way that we go about this is pretty clear from an asset focus. With a platform or with an enabling technology, it can be a little harder, and to sort of come down with a specific value proposition, and we within that sort of way of thinking. So I think we do have to have a different level of discussion. How are we recognizing the value? What impact do we want an AI platform or data? What impact is that going to have to the business? I think it's also a question for the biotechs and the investors, funding companies in this space, is just to understand who they ultimately will be talking to within the organization. Is it a data proposition, and is that data something going to be shared with multiple partners, or in which case there's probably less value to any one individual partner if the data is more openly available to a few of them than there would be to something that could be given exclusively. And then it's like, okay, are we improving clinical success rates? Are we opening up something specific to one of our drugs to support biomarker strategies, combination strategies, or are we opening up new target ID in a new indication space? So all of these just need a different level of thinking, and it's slightly different to the norm. So I think I see a few companies out there that I'm not sure we're ready for the kind of business models that support maybe what they're trying to get to, and that can recognize or easily have an easy conversation about how we recognize some of that value piece. And then on the second point around the platform deals, I guess we would keep any analysis that we're doing on the company and the company's data and the platform very separate from anything we're doing internally. So there would be an element of maybe a bespoke instance of something that we could be looking to use and run some exploratory work on, but otherwise keep that quite separate. And with confidentiality obligations that we talked about previously, outside of the deal, we may have to completely discontinue the use and access of that.
Yeah, maybe to add to that and sort of re-emphasize what Duncan says, right? I mean, with this new sort of instance way of working that came up over the last maybe 5 to 7 years in terms of BD, right? BD interactions. I think for me in those 5-7 years, 2 points have changed. One is, whereas in the past, and that's certainly true for Merck. I don't know whether it's the same for some of the other bigger pharma companies, but now if you want to do a platform deal with Merck, it's not enough to have the algorithm, the AI, the tech, right? We are always looking for an AI plus thing. So you should also have the data to support the algorithm, or have a way to get data to support the algorithm in an area that is of interest to us, and so on and so forth, right? So things like, I mean, there's a number of companies out there on the virtual screening space who just give you a virtual hit, basically, right? And then ask for, a compensation for that. And that's fine, you should get compensated, right? But if it then comes down to sort of, okay, I want a royalty downstream from that, and so on and so forth, that becomes a difficult situation, because it's so little, and it's such a limited fraction of the overall value chain, that then asking for a big chunk of the overall value that's a difficult discussion to be had, right? So, by and large, if you have a very sort of very small or very limited offering towards the entire, as in the context of the entire value chain, the offering is better off to interact with big pharma, at least in a sort of service model, you get paid for your work, that's clear, but the IP stays with, comes to us, and then we can use the IP in any shape or form that we want, right? As soon as we've done a number of these deals in the last couple of years, where the partner takes us a larger chunk of the value chain. So for example, you do the entire preclinical development to a drug candidate, then it's a different discussion because you're taking more work, you're taking on more risk, and so on and so forth. And then we can talk about milestones and royalties and so on and so forth, right?
Yeah.
So that's one aspect of it. I think the other aspect I mentioned earlier, right? So what we tend to do now is the technology is not enough anymore. There needs to be AI plus, and that typically tends to be proprietary access to data.
Okay, fantastic. Just conscious of time as well, and I think we've reached the end of our session. Alexandria, maybe I can hand over to yourself to do just a very quick wrap up and summary of today.
Yeah, absolutely. And just thank you everyone for the time, engagement, for the questions. Sorry that we weren't able to get to all of those, but I think some really interesting discussion here today around repeatable processes and the use of AI to drive efficiencies in those repeatable processes, whether that is in R&D, whether that's in the business development world. Obviously, there are key considerations in terms of confidentiality of the data that can be used. And it did sound like quite a bit of our conversation was around changing the hearts and minds of individuals and teams to adopting the use of AI. There needs to be a business problem, there needs to be ideation, and we should not shy away from the ideation. Similarly to how the scientists approach their work, there is ideation, we test, we fail, we move on, we try something different. It seems like the recommendations from the panelists in the room today is that that is absolutely an important part of understanding how best to adopt AI at, yes, an enterprise level, but also function specific. So those are some of the kind of key themes from today's session. But we can certainly send around the recording, I think, after this, Adam, for those to listen back to certain aspects of the conversation they might want to dig into specifically. And please do again follow up with any questions to those of us on the line.